by Benning. Darnell Nurse left it in the corner, gets up center. Perry scores! Corey Perry!
Ilya able to shake away from Solani. It's given away to Solani. Around in front. Score! Teemu Solani with the steal. Perry on the fence. 1-1. Score! Off the floor! On the board! Paul Kariya!
All right, we're back. We're live. Oh, we're back for the
What's
post-game
up?
show this time. I was gonna do
Let's go.
the whole. Did you watch the Game Awards, or did you see the not? Okay, let's refer. Nobody watched it, but did you see? Did you see the bit at the end of the Game of the Year awards when From Software got up on stage?
No.
Okay, so that's why I debated doing the bit or not. There's this kid who followed the developers on stage when they did their acceptance speech for Game of the Year, and he's like, "I'd like to nominate this award to my reformed rabbi Bill Clinton." And he just walked up on stage and said that, and then he got escorted off. But like, no security. It was amazing. He literally just got up out of the seats, followed them on stage, stood behind them, waited till they were done, and then walked up to the mic and said that. It was great.
That's incredible. I don't know who that kid is, but they are now officially my hero.
Yeah, it was
Absolutely incredible.
It was amazing, and it became a whole bit that everybody was making memes about. What is the ashes? They summoned the wrong ash for the Game Awards, or I forget what, it's like an invader, a dark invader appeared or something, and they had the guy like shrouded in red. It was hilarious. It was good. But
That's funny.
I was gonna do that bit, and I was like, I don't know if you've seen it, you won't understand. But
I'd have no idea what the hell you're talking about.
yeah, that would have been a great way to start the show.
I did shake Bill Clinton's hand one time, and then my girlfriend sexually assaulted him, and he laughed it off. So when I first got to UCLA, there was like a rally at some point for like Jerry Brown and Gavin Newsom and because Jerry Brown was running for governor and Gavin Newsom was running for lieutenant governor, I think. And so there was like a speech on campus or whatever, and like Bill Clinton was speaking. So like, whatever, dude, I was like 20. I was like, yeah, I'll go see Bill Clinton speak. Let's go.
Yeah.
And so a bunch of us went over there, and I had like just met my girlfriend at this point. We were just friends. And so we all go, and we're walking over, and some woman like with like a headset and like a thing, she comes up to us and she was like, "Do you guys want to stand on stage?" And we're like, "What?" She goes, "Do you guys want to stand on stage?" And we're like, "Yeah, sure, okay." She goes, "All right, come with me." And then they like gave us signs, and we literally stood in the very first row behind the speakers. And so like everybody comes on and they give their speech, and like obviously Bill Clinton goes last because like he was obviously like one, the biggest name, but two, like the best speaker. And he like gives his speech or whatever, and then he like kind of walks off stage and says goodbye, and he just kind of walks along like the crowd behind him, like where we're all standing on this like honestly like an elementary school picture, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the bleacher.
Yeah.
And so he's like shaking everybody's hand, and he steps over, and my girlfriend just grabs him and gives him a hug. And this dude looked like
Sure.
absolutely breakable. Like he looked very fragile. He absolutely looked his age.
Yeah.
But he's a tall dude. He's like, I don't know, like 6'2", 6'3", whatever he is. But like it was really funny. And so my girlfriend just grabs him and gives him a hug, and and then she lets go, and all of a sudden he just goes, "That was unexpected, but nice," and just kind of keeps on walking. And so I always give my girlfriend shit because she's like, she like assaulted a former president, and it was very funny.
Love it.
And I just will never forget his response. "Well, that was unexpected, but nice." I'm just, God damn, man.
Classic.
So funny.
All right. Well, we are here, as we said, to do the post-game show. First one in a while, and probably in hindsight now, we picked just an absolute stinker of a game to come on.
Yeah,
here.
we're the smartest people alive.
Yeah, but to be fair, not a lot of great games this year to pick from. You look at
Edward, whatever do you mean?
No, you look at the slate of games this week, and you could say Ottawa probably would have been the best bet to come on here for a good chance at getting a win, considering where they are in the standings versus the other teams we have to play this week in Toronto, Montreal, and LA. So better today, I think, than tomorrow. I just know every time the Ducks come to Toronto, specifically when I've been able to go see them, I'm not paying $150 to go per ticket to go see them tomorrow. But they always lose in Toronto. So I'm expecting more of the same tomorrow. And the way the Leafs have been playing, I think probably a better choice to do today than tomorrow, because tomorrow could be bleak on a second or a back-to-back too.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ultimate testament to how much things have turned around in Toronto is that Toronto media is talking about, could William Nylander possibly hit 50 goals this year? And normally it's like, why does William Nylander suck, and why is he the worst member on the team, and his $7 million needs to go? And they're like, what if he hit 50 goals? And I'm like, oh, okay, things are like back to are back on track in Toronto.
I feel like I didn't know he was like doing as well as he was. I hadn't heard too much about him. And I've tried to.
Fucking Mitch Marner is on like a 45-game point streak, and he's the local kid, and he steals all the attention.
I've tried to tune out the Toronto media and everything, but I think Nylander had a 5-point game the other day, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, is William Nylander actually one of the best players in the league? And then that's the conversation that starts from it. It's not like, oh yeah, William Nylander's quietly having a really good season. He's a really good player. It's like the utmost extreme end of it. They're like, is William Nylander the best winger in the National Hockey League? Is William Nylander better than Connor McDavid? Like that's where the conversation like starts going. It just goes to like the whole
awesome.
Like pitch end of it is like, he's a god now, and we didn't throw him in every trade rumor we possibly could just a year and a half ago.
Yeah, they haven't been trying to run that dude out of town since he got drafted.
Same with Mitch too, right? Like anytime Mitch didn't show up in the playoffs, Mitch Marner didn't score a goal in the playoffs for his like first 15 playoff games of his career or something, and it's like, oh, Mitch Marner's a bum. We got to get him out of here, trade him for somebody else, bring in that defenseman or goaltender we need, and then the guy rattles off like a 21-game point streak, and it was like, oh man, like there's no way we can get rid of this guy. Like it's
good players are good. Yeah. Wild to think about.
Yeah, wild when Austin Matthews is not doing amazing things this year, that other guys step up and claim the spotlight. They're actually good players, and John Tavares too is looking like John Tavares from the Islanders, but he was shit on pretty much any chance he get too. I mean, that's just the Toronto media, right? If you're not playing well, then you get.
Well, the other thing is like, the thing with Tavares is like, he's the oldest, and his contract is the most clearly like,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
It's the easy one to look at and be like, yeah, that's gonna hurt them sooner rather than later. Probably already is, but
when the raw production isn't there from Nylander, it's very easy to just be dismissive of how good he is, anyways. Mm-hmm. And be like, oh, well, that's $7 million. That could be like a number one defenseman or whatever the fuck, right?
Yeah.
But, like, he's playing really well, so you can't do that. And, you know, John Tavares, like you said, is having, you know, probably the best year he's had in Toronto, and that was after being almost, I think, a 100-point player last year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, like, he's better this year. And then, you know, again, it's just hilarious, right? It's like, oh, we had to basically shoot Morgan Riley, TJ Brody, and Jake Muzzin.
Yeah.
And now it's just forwards and Mark Giordano, and everything's fine. Okay, sure, why not?
Yeah, shout out to Rasmus Sandin, who we were pretty heavily voting on the Ducks to bring in when he was before he had signed his RFA status contract. That he's been tearing it up. He's got the best opportunity possible to him, in a sense that all these guys are out, and he stepped up and plays now like 22, 23 minutes a night, and he's looking pretty good, which is disappointing because I would have loved to have him in Anaheim. Another guy who's looking pretty good, who I take shoulder some of the blame for his performance tonight, Alex DeBrincat. I was sitting here before the game, I was like, man, is this trade not worked out that well for the Sens? Like, he hasn't looked that good so far since or at least hasn't looked like Alex DeBrincat since coming to Ottawa. A guy who's perennial 40 goal scorer, and he rattles off two goals against the Ducks tonight. Of course, right? Like it's just the perfect timing. It always seems to be when you start looking at how a guy's not been doing that good, he lights up your team. That's usually the case with Anaheim.
Yeah. Speaking of Pat Verbeek not adding guys people ask for,
just dive right into it.
Let's go for
I love
it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess there's a few things we can do. Like we can do like that kind of crap. We can do the what the hell just happened between this game and the San Jose game, which I feel is like kind of where you were going. And I just brought up Twitter, and a tweet came up from earlier, and I was like, "Oh, that's right, the Eeli Tolvanen thing."
Yeah, it's everything. Yeah, I mean, everybody. I mean, it happens when a lot of, I don't want to say a lot of players go on waivers, but anybody that's like not complete trash that is like notable that goes on waivers because where the Ducks are, like they have the number one waiver priority until they're not in last place. So it always becomes a topic of conversation. Like we had this conversation on a pod when Mike Riley was on waivers. We've had this conversation, I think, at least 3 or 4 times this year when different guys have been on waivers. This was, I think, maybe if you want to call it the most high-profile player or profile of player who went on waivers, and Tolvanen, former first-round pick, a guy who was a highly touted prospect, good World Juniors performance, good performance in the KHL. In the U.S. Hockey League at one point as well. So a guy who Predators fans liked a lot from looking at the comments, and a guy who's still playing pretty well defensively, and his offensive production hasn't been that bad over the last couple of years with the Preds. A couple 11-goal, 20-point seasons in about, I think, 40 games and 70 games. So it's not completely awful when you're only playing 10, 11 minutes a night. But he ends up going to Seattle. 21 teams pass on this guy when if you had to scroll through like just the 5 teams who had the highest waiver priority and their fan bases on Twitter. I think it was Anaheim, Chicago, Columbus, and Arizona. Everybody wanted this guy. And then even the teams below that as well. Like, I saw even some Leafs fans like, oh my God, if this guy falls to Toronto, like, I want to take this guy in a heartbeat. And of course it's Seattle of all teams, right? Like they always just seem to make the right decision at this point. But are you surprised how many teams passed on this guy? Because I was. Like, I thought, okay, there's obviously a chance the Ducks don't take him. Like, every time we want them to take a guy on waivers, they don't. But for him to go through that many teams that aren't willing to take a shot on him, and he goes all the way down to Seattle.
So here's the thing about that, right? Because I think that has kind of been the assumption by certain people. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to remember that he makes $1.45 million this year and next.
Yeah.
There are only 10 teams in the league right now who can absorb a full 1.5 more, can absorb that. Yeah. And the 11th team is, I want to say, Calgary, and they have just under $1 million. And so I do think a part of it is there are still teams struggling to make sure they have the necessary amount of cap space. And I think, the Predators are a team that's trying to contend, right? Their intention at the very least is to contend. And if they're not going to keep this guy up, then I think that says something for the teams in front of him. Now, to what you said earlier, he is a former first-round pick, which is something usually we've seen GMs really kind of fall in love with. He does have a really good shot, and his underlying defensive numbers are very strong. So, in a lot of ways, what you can look at it and be like, oh, Seattle is exactly the team that I think before last season, and based on kind of how this season's gone, and just kind of, the people who are in the room there and what the general opinion of those people are, like Namita and stuff like that. It makes a lot of sense for them, right? It gives them some solid bottom 6 depth. Brian Baston, who writes for On the Forecheck, or is an editor over there at the very least. I don't know how much he writes anymore, but he does a bunch of stuff. He's wonderful. Find him on Twitter, he's great. But he, as soon as it was announced that he went on waivers yesterday, he tweeted me and was just like, congratulations, because I think it was Michael Blake McCurdy tweets out the waiver order every time there's somebody semi-notable who goes on. And, there were a lot of people who like him, and like you said, the Predators fan base seemed to be pretty keen on him and be hopeful for him, but he hasn't really been playing this year, and so it just kind of seems like it was just a decision that they had to make as far as just giving the roster spot to someone who is going to be able to get into more games right now for whatever reason. And so I think, sorry, I got kind of sidetracked, but I mean, this is what I mean, like the 21 different teams on thing, right? Of it, like that's the thing I think is a part is like it's hard to justify bringing him in if you're not going to play him right away and when he's being waived by a team that is trying to be competitive. And then on top of that, there aren't actually as many teams as you would think who have the ability to absorb that contract should they claim him. And, maybe you can send someone down or something like that and clear up $800K or something like that. But it's still worth mentioning. As far as Anaheim is concerned, he would have been the player that I would have loved to bring in. He would have been a player I would have at least tried to move into the top 6 and just see what happens. I think having a guy who has a real shot like that and has strong, defensive numbers, like my opinion of John Hinds is not particularly high. So I think it would have been interesting to bring him in, but I think ultimately at the end of the day, it's not the biggest loss. I think it's, I guess, let me ask you this way, like, how do you compare that with the Jason Megna claiming?
Yeah, I don't. I think with bringing in Jason Megna, like if you want to give a guy a shot, and obviously he played tonight too, it does make it hard to claim somebody else right after when you do have a lot of guys on the roster already. I'm sure it plays into that decision. I'd be it's an interesting hypothetical situation to think, okay, if they didn't claim Jason Megna, would they have gone out and 100% for sure claimed Tolvanen instead? I don't know. Magnet, like, he just feels like the typical Ducks waiver claim, right? Of just kind of like this random journeyman, middling fourth liner guy who's in between the AHL, and the Ducks always claim those guys and give them a shot, and they play pretty well. Nice energy guy, and that's usually who they go after. But yeah, I mean, with Tolvanen, like it was a little bit interesting. Like you said, like I know there was a lot of teams that, whether they didn't have the cap space, or I think like the Flyers and a few teams were at 50 contracts, so they couldn't bring him in. So there were a few teams that obviously had to pass. I think the Ducks and really those first 5 teams, they all had a chance. They all had the cap space. They all had the contracts that they would be able to fit him in and give him a chance. But again, like we had this argument with, or this conversation at least, with Mike Riley, and it seems like a no-brainer. And like all the stats line up, the analytics line up for this guy being a good player, somebody should give him a shot. And then ultimately he either gets completely passed on or passed on by several teams. And there's other factors that play into it that a lot of times we're not privy to on why this decision was made, why this guy wasn't brought in. I mean, even Timo was backing the Ducks to go out and get Tolvanen. This one felt like it would happen. It just felt like it had a little bit more behind it of people saying, oh, Anaheim seems like a no-brainer here. They should definitely go out and get this guy, and they don't. He's just a guy I think I would have liked to see given a shot. Again, like, we talk about how often, if a guy's a former first-round pick, how many shots at the, how many kicks at the can they get for just being a former first-round pick. And we bring that into our evaluation discussions of players a lot of times. This guy just needs to change the scenery. He's a former first-round pick. Like, how many times I'm sure Oilers fans are going through that with Jesse Puljujarvi right now, too. The guy just got through an interview talking about how he doesn't know if he's got to cut it for the NHL, but I'm sure there's several teams out there would take another look at this guy just because he was a former, such a high former first-round pick. And I think with Tolvanen, there was enough teams, and clearly Seattle as well, willing to take that risk. And for me, as a Ducks fan, I think the Ducks could use more guys who have such a heavy shot like Tolvanen. I mean, we talk about that's why we brought in Vetrano, a guy who shoots the puck, who has a hard shot. And I think with a team that lacks goal scoring, it doesn't cost you anything to bring this guy in and give him a shot and see what he can do. You've got the cap space; it's not going to hurt you, and you've got him for another year beyond this if things do work out at a really nice cap hit. But I'd be interested. I'm sure there'll never be a comment on it, but I'd be interested to hear the decision making behind that and why they didn't want to bring this guy in, because it does seem like on paper as being a no-brainer for a guy for the Ducks to take a chance on, especially the way things are going this year.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know what I mean? Because I wonder, like, how much of this, if at all, is just how weird the depth chart for wingers is on this team, right? Like,
Yeah.
it just kind of feels awkward and unsettled, and I wonder if any part of it is they really just want to keep seeing what they have with the guys right now. And a guy like Jason Megna, I think you could say is a little bit easier to be like found money about. And if they have to waive him to send him down because it doesn't work out, well then, hey man, he wasn't on the team to start the year. They lost him in the middle of the year. It doesn't really make a big difference. He's a guy that obviously they like, and they like whatever he can bring as far as his play. And, we saw him tonight, like, get back and break up a chance on a back check. Like, he's been fine from what I've seen of him so far. But I think it's kind of there's nothing to really lose, even if he gets claimed again. Whereas with Tolvanen, I think you're looking at a little bit closer to kind of the Hayden Fleury trade, where it's like, we would kind of like to hold on to this guy and see what we can get out of him. Or I guess Daniel Sprong's, or not Daniel Sprong, what's his name? Christian Juice is the easy one in that sense, right? As far as just having a guy and be like, well, we kind of want to just see what he is, and then you just kind of lose him. And, you
just feels like there could be a little bit more there, right? Like something could actually come out of that, rather you look at Magna and you're like, you know what you're going to get, but like nothing else is going to come out of that. Like it's not all of a sudden going to turn into more.
I think what you get out of that is they know exactly what he is, and so losing him for nothing isn't a big deal.
Yeah.
Because I think what this is fundamentally about to me, and this is obviously wild speculation, but it really does just feel like the point of this year for Verbeek is to like see what the guys that are already here are, right? He brought in 3 guys. To whatever extent it's working or not working with them, he very clearly had an idea of what they were, and I think by and large they've all, whether effectively or successfully or not, they've all been exactly the guys we kind of expected them to be when they walked in the door. So, and you look at guys like Silfverberg and Henrique, who only have 1 more year left on their deal. So this gives you, in that sense, a little bit of like middle six kind of redundancy moving forward. But it feels like his whole thing is just, I don't know these kids. I want to figure out what these young guys have. Like, and it's interesting in that sense, right? That somebody like Beaulieu stayed up over Mahura back when they lost Mahura. I think in that context, it's very interesting. But I do think fundamentally, like, I don't know about you, but like I felt like it was kind of just time to move on from Mahura. And I'm glad he's doing well in Florida. I just don't think he would have been able to play that way here.
Yeah, and he had a great start, but he's in what he is in Florida right now is exactly what he is in Anaheim or was in Anaheim. Is just kind of a guy who is a 5'6", 7th defenseman who came in to fill in injuries, and they're starting to get guys healthy a lot, and he'll still be that guy, and he might be a guy that fluctuates between the NHL and the AHL for Florida as well, and I want to see him do well, and I hope he does well and continues to do well in Florida. But yeah, I mean, I think the Ducks had seen enough of him at that point, and it was about seeing, Vakanainen was eventually going to come back and has come back now, and to see what you can get from him, and to see what you have in Beaulieu or White and those guys that you haven't been able to see for the last couple of years, right? That unlike what you have in Mahura. So yeah, I think it was about kind of seeing what you have in these guys and doing that for a full stretch across the season. But the problem is, like, you get these weird stretches of games where, like, you play Carolina, San Jose, and Ottawa, and you expect the game against Carolina would probably be the toughest game, the game that you lose, and San Jose should be the one you pick up the win. But meanwhile, you've got a completely different type of performance against Carolina, where you play a really steady game and a good game throughout the entirety of it, and you pick up a 4-3 win in overtime. Fun, exciting game. You follow that up with just probably the worst game of the season, the 6-1 loss to the Sharks, and then another stinker today, a 3-0 loss to the Sens, where you really weren't able to generate too much. The 32 shots on net, I think the Ducks finished the night with, they don't really do justice to the lack of quality scoring chances the Ducks had in this game. And it just shows you kind of like the obvious development there is this year, and where there are games like the one against Carolina. We have had a few and far between, but some of them this year where the Ducks have looked like they can be competitive against better teams. I remember that win against the Rangers as well, where they looked a lot better in games like that. And then you just have, the 2/3, I guess, of the rest of the games are games like that one against San Jose, where, you're playing a team who should be close to you in the standings, a team that you should be having a competitive game against, and you just get absolutely destroyed in a really embarrassing game where they lose 6-1 to a team that I think is just as bad as them, but clearly not in that case. So it's a weird one this year for sure, with the types of performances that they're putting out there.
Yeah, it's absolutely wild, bro. Like, I think the thing for me that was different about the San Jose game, and the San Jose game just felt like a practice. Like, they just felt like they were going through the motions. And I don't know if that's fair, but they didn't look like they were playing with any urgency. They didn't look like they were playing with any emotion or energy. They were just, or someone on Twitter, Tony, said that it looked like they were skating through mud. And I think that's exactly right. They just looked just very kind of slow, and it was just bad. And I just couldn't remember then, and still honestly can't really remember now, a time where they looked that bad in the last couple of years. And they've been pretty fucking awful at various points of the last couple of years. And I feel like that was pretty clearly the low point of the Dallas Aikens era. I think that was the first game, for me, that was really the first game where I was like, oh, I think you can absolutely come out of this game firing the head coach, and there's really nothing to question.
It's one of those games. It's one of those types of losses against, those teams that you should be beating or shouldn't be losing to like that, where you're like, okay, even me, I don't think this guy was going to get fired. And I came out of that game like, okay, this could be the one that does it. That's one of those games where the next day you wake up and, guys, he's gone. He's out the door.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Yeah, it felt like it could be one of those. It definitely could have, and I know there's a lot of people who are saying it should have been, but you come out of that now and he's still here. I don't think anything can happen at this point. There's not much worse than you can get than a performance like that, and if he gets through that in the run that the Ducks are in right now, where they haven't played well, I don't see how he doesn't make it to the end of the season at this point.
Yeah, I said coming into the season, I didn't think he'd make it past Valentine's Day. As the season went on, I felt like that was probably still right about right. Then we had the Pat Verbeek podcast interview where he stated very plainly, my intention is still to push this off till the end of the season. And I was like, okay, then, yeah, I think, it's probably just fair to assume that he's not going anywhere. And then that game happened, and I was like, oh, he could get fired before the game is over.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it was very kind of surprising for me to find myself in that place. And I got kind of bummed about it, because I really like Dallas Eakins. I really, really do. I really like so many things about him. But at this point, it seems fair to say that the on-ice aspect of his tenure has just been a disaster.
Yeah.
And I think you can point to some of the growth some of the players have had under him, and I think that's very real. But I think the totality of it, is brutal. And, as much as me especially talk about the lack of, above average defensemen on this roster, there is a degree to which you should be able to create a system or a structure that mitigates that a little bit, right? have the forwards like play more defensively by nature and really try to insulate those guys so they're not having to do as much, they're not getting pressured as much and things like that. And that just hasn't been there. And at different times it's looked like it was just players playing poorly, and at other times it's looked like they don't know what they're supposed to do. And, that's one of those things that can be, kind of hard to differentiate, I think, at certain times. But last night very much felt like they were just like, I don't even care. And there's a degree to which that has to be part of, like, that's part of the coach's job, is making sure that these guys are prepared to play every night. And that San Jose game was just, oof, man. And it got bad fast. It just felt like you were just watching it all happen, and it was over. And it was just wild. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was, I saw a tweet, and I think it was CJ a couple of days ago, was looking at how the Ducks were underperforming in pretty much every projection. I think Evolving Wild had them in their projections and Dom's projections, and the Ducks were projected not to be good, but they're completely underperforming even the poor projections that they had from them during the season. But they're 22nd in shooting percentage, 16th in save percentage at even strength. So they're still doing well in some areas that they shouldn't be this bad. So he pointed that towards how poor coaching has kind of still brought them down even further than their actual numbers. And when you start to look at that, like, you can definitely see it, I think. And I think in any other situation other than what the Ducks are in right now, like, there's absolutely no way Dallas Eakins would still be here at this point or would have survived a game like the game against the Sharks. My random question, because I know how much you love Dallas Eakins, like, does he, one, deserve, and two, get another shot after he eventually moves on from the Ducks?
I don't think he will.
Because now he's got two job-defining eras. The Oilers era, where it wasn't great, and now
I think you've got 4 eras that you have to look at with him. You have to look at his time as the head coach of the Marlies, where he was very successful. Then he made the jump to Edmonton. Fucking disaster.
Yeah.
Then he came to San Diego, and he had a lot of success. He was a very good coach in the AHL. Then he came up to Anaheim, and it's been a fucking disaster.
Is that almost worse, looking at it that way? Because then when you paint the picture that way with the 2 AHL stints, like, that almost paints you as like, yeah, you're good you're a good minor league coach. You're a good AHL
but I
coach,
wonder, and so that's the part of this that, like, trying to have a conversation about can be a little dicey, because, like, what the gap in his efficacy between the 2 leagues is, like, where is he deficient isn't necessarily something we have access to, but, like,
yeah,
I wonder if on some degree it's just about buy-in. I wonder if when it's minor leaguers and guys who have to grind constantly, right? Like the guys who are only doing this for $70K and are putting themselves through this kind of shit and really hoping that they get that call up, right? Like, you're looking, like, when you're dealing with a bunch of guys like Sam Carrick, I think there's something, to how much more they buy into kind of his whole, culture and his ideals and what he wants out of his players. And I wonder if at this level where it does kind of tend to be a little bit more about skill, just because you have to work so incredibly hard to make the NHL, like, everybody's put in that work. And so once you become an official, like, once you're an NHLer, at that point, it's really your health and your skill that keep you in the league. And I just wonder if for those guys, maybe his message is just doesn't hit quite as hard, or what it is. But it's just, I think there's a lot of evidence to point to the fact that he's a good coach. And I think there's a lot of evidence to point that he's a good coach, but he's not an NHL coach.
Yeah.
And again, I want to be wrong. I said this on Twitter, like after that Sharks game. I want to be wrong so bad. I would love for him to have another chance and to really make it, have a good run. I'm just not sure that he will get it because I think the way things went in Edmonton and now in Anaheim, it'll be hard for somebody to talk themselves into it unless he goes down and has another great run as an AHL coach again somewhere, right? Whenever Dan Bilesma gets hired, if he goes and takes over the Thunderbirds job, right? Like, I don't know, but I have a hard time seeing him get that third opportunity, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's going to be a difficult sell, I think, for teams to move past those two stints and how bad this one has been. I mean, like, you look at kind of the historic numbers the Ducks are approaching right now. The lowest number of, or the least amount of regulation wins in an NHL season is the Washington Capitals. I'm imagining that is their infamous year one expansion season.
What, like 76 or something like that?
Yeah, I think it was, because there was, I think it was the Sabres were on pace for like that season at one point and how bad it was, and they eventually snapped out of it a little bit. Somebody was on pace for that. But like it's within reach for the Ducks. Like they have one regulation win. In the same tweet, somebody said the 1980 Winnipeg Jets had one regulation win in their first 33 games. The Ducks have one regulation win right now in 29 games. So they are very close to getting to that.
Well, 30
number.
Now, right? Or is tonight 29? Oh, no, tonight was game 29. My bad.
I think tonight was game 29.
Yeah, it was. That's my bad.
So they need 7 in, after the next game, 53 games, they need 7 regulation wins, which should be possible, but they've gone 29 games with just 1 so far, and they don't look like they're getting anywhere close to that. I think it might have been Felix who tweeted out a couple of days ago. I saw like their new point projections. It was like 49 points or something like that right at the end of this, like 16 points below their total from last year.
Here's the thing that's fucked up about this, and Derek Lee, I think it's called the Sporting Tribune. He wrote it. He writes at the Hockey Writers, and we know him that way. But like, he's got that new gig, and he made a comment, and I hadn't thought about like even looking into this, but he said that if you just take the trade deadline games last year for the Ducks, they basically played at the exact same pace, like a 50-point pace.
Yeah,
and when you say it that way, it's kind of crazy to think about the fact that they added players after that.
Yeah.
And yet they're still that bad. But also, like, at the same time, it's like, yeah, they're just not there yet. Like, the guys that could take them past that, right, that could pull them farther forward, they're just not there yet. And that's not their fault or anything like that. It's just the reality of it, which is why moving on from those guys last year made so much sense. But it's just so weird, the idea that, like, they're basically the same team they were at the end of last year as far as points percentage.
Yeah, it's brutal. I mean, again, the light at the end of the tunnel, when you see it after almost every loss, like that picture that Bleacher Report put out there of Connor Bedard in the Ducks sweater, that makes its rounds after every loss at this point. And the Ducks are firmly in that number 1 pick spot right now with a .586 points per game percentage. Chicago is now second last with a .692. The only other team with an under 80.800 points per game percentage is San Jose at .767. So the Ducks are firmly in those top odds right now and are likely going to hold those for most of the year. The only team I could see getting any chance of passing them is Chicago because of just how bad we knew they were going to be going into this year, and knowing that eventually they're going to lose, if not just Patrick Kane, potentially Jonathan Toews as well if they decide to move on from him. But it seems like Kane is likely out the door along with a lot of other Ducks players, Klingberg, Shattenkirk, and others that are going to be out the door. And as somebody says in the chat here, that draft lottery, if it was Anaheim, Chicago 1-2, and Chicago ended up winning that draft lottery, I think I would just sign out of Twitter for a good until the draft, pretty much, because the conspiracy theory comments about it being rigged would just be ripe, 100% like ripe and ready to go. That the league handed the Blackhawks Connor Bedard. I couldn't handle that.
No, it'll be insane. I
just hate that they're even in the mix, because at least if it was like, oh, you lost to San Jose or Columbus or Arizona, like, it's hard to make that argument that the league is rigging it for one of those teams to get Connor Bedard. But with Chicago like right in the mix there, you know that's going to be the case if they end up winning. Despite having what would be the second best odds, it would still be counted as being rigged.
Yeah, 100%. And I will say this right now. The NHL doesn't rig the lottery. And you can tell they don't, because if they did, Connor McDavid would not be in Edmonton. That being said, when the draft lottery comes and Anaheim does fall to third, I will literally live in a tinfoil hat, and you can't take it off of me. Yeah. Because the NHL doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt on this one. And, like, they 100%, you know what I mean? Like, it's stupid to say that they're going to rig it, but at the same time, I'm absolutely going to say that they rigged it.
If only Chicago wins, or if anybody other than Anaheim?
No. If Anaheim falls 3 spots, if they fall 1 spot, hey, man, sometimes that happens. But if they fall all the way to third, then it's a for sure. I don't care.
I love that, and like, I'd probably feel the same way too. But mathematically, there's a higher chance that they fall to 3 than winning first.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, it's designed to work that way. Like, that's the way the system is designed. And I get that. Like, that's why I'm saying, like, it's stupid to think that they would. But at the same time, I'm 100% going to lean into it, because it'll make me feel better to be ridiculous.
Yeah, it's the only way to. It's the only way to act after losing out on Connor.
Exactly. Really, the only way to act is out of pocket, and that is the quickest way to get there. And I think that's
especially
important.
After what is still going to continue to be a long season at that point in time, wrapping up, thankfully, a brutal year. To not win the draft lottery would just be a nightmare. Because, like, yeah, I'm sure it's been tough for Chicago. I'm sure for Blackhawks fans, I don't feel sorry for them one bit. But they, like, you knew this was going to be like this, right? Like, you 100% knew they were going to be that bad. As Coyotes fans are probably living it up right now. Like, they're not good, but they're not anywhere near as bad as I think people thought they would be. We knew the Ducks were going to be bad. Nobody knew they were going to be this bad. Like, that's the thing, and that's 100% why. This is my pitch to the NHL. Why I think the Ducks deserve it. Nobody thought we were going to be this bad, and we're just awful. So.
Yeah.
Please hand us Connor Bedard. But we do have to talk. This is a post-game show, so we do have to talk about tonight's game. Don't want to get too into it, because there really isn't too much to cover. Other like the Ducks lost 3-0. I guess the big talking point and discussion point of tonight was Lukas Dostal made his first start of the season, and he looked great. Like, that's the one positive from tonight is his play, and nobody really gave him too much help, especially on those. The first goal was a deflection, I think, or did it end up? Yeah, it was Zaitsev shot that hit Kelly, and deflected past him, and then the first DeBrincat goal, pass across crease from Giroux. Nothing he could do on that one. Barring those goals, he was exceptional. I thought 35 saves on 38 shots. A great way to start your first game of the season after, again, he's been doing the same thing in San Diego. They haven't been good this year. He's been kind of the lone bright spot down there. He's used to this type of game where he gets absolutely lit up and no help in front of him. So it's great to see him come in and play well, because he's likely going to at least be a split share, timeshare guy next year. He needs to get as many games as he can and get used to this, because this is what it's going to be like, and at least for the next couple of years when he's starting to finally move into full-time NHL duties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No. He looked great. He looked how you wanted him to look. He looked athletic. He looked comfortable. I thought he didn't ever look completely out of his depth. And he had a couple of absolutely incredible saves. Like, again, like, he stopped a 3-0. And I still can't believe that happened, but I think even more, I can't believe how little effort the players on the ice didn't put into trying to get back. Like, they were just like, oh, this is a 3-0. Let's just see what happens now. And I can't, like, that breaks my old man brain. It drives me crazy.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, it really, like, just absolutely breaks the boomer part of my brain. But he did everything you could have possibly asked of him tonight. He made as many saves as he could he stopped everything he should have stopped tonight. And I don't think, that there is anything else positive to take out of this game except for that. But with the way everything has gone over the last couple of years with Gibson and now this year being the Willie won't they and all that crap, and then you've got Stolarz who's expiring, like, there is a lot to be excited about, it would seem, with Lukas Dostal, and the idea of putting a more talented team in front of him, but a more structured team in front of him is very, very encouraging. So, like you said, it was the lone bright spot, but it was a very bright spot, I thought. And it was nice to see him play so well despite walking into a house of horrors. Sorry. Sounded like I said whorehouse, which is not what I meant.
Yeah, definitely not. Do you give him another start on this road trip? Because they've got 3 more games. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, right? So
what's the Thursday game?
It's Montreal.
Yeah, I started in Montreal.
Yeah, that's again, a lot of it depends.
Because who's the 4th game?
It's LA on the Tuesday of next week.
Ooh, actually, I might start him for the LA game.
That's a back-to-back as well. The Ducks play the Wednesday at home against Minnesota, so he could get one.
Then you know what? I think you could talk me into doing that. Is play Gibby against the Leafs, play Gibby against the Habs.
Yeah. Then
play Dostal against the Kings, and then Gibby against the Wild? You said the next night.
Yeah, the Wild. Yeah. That the Wild feels like a Gibby game, the way they've been playing, and obviously the way Gibson really usually takes the tougher games. So I would imagine I would like to see him against Montreal, but knowing that that's a back-to-back, and if Stolarz isn't healthy, he's going to have to get one of those games. I don't see them playing him 3 games and playing Ottawa tonight and Montreal and then one of those 2, knowing that that's a back-to-back near the end of the road trip. It could be possible that, to avoid giving Gibson 3 of the games on the road trip, you give him the next 2, Toronto, Montreal. You give Dostal the end of the road trip game against LA, and then Gibby comes back in for Minnesota. I would like to see that. I'd like to see him against LA. I'd like to see him at least one more time before Stolarz comes back and get him some reps in, because he absolutely deserves it after the performance tonight. And I know it's hard to keep him up. I mean, every time he's come up, he's looked good. It's just, at this point, it's hard to keep him up because you've got Gibson and Stolarz. You can't really have this guy sit on the bench and run 3 goaltenders at this point. So unless one of them's moved on, you've got to send him back down. But I feel like every time he's come up, we've come out of the game saying, yeah, you know what? Like he looks like he belongs. He looks like an NHL netminder. He's done everything he should have in those games. He's made the important saves. Never really looked like he was rattled or the moment got the best of him. So he's done what he needs to do at this point. But I think whether it's near the end of this year, if you move on from one of Gibson and Stolarz, or at least for next year, like he looks like he's ready to take that next step into actually starting 15 to 20 games in a season. I think he's getting very close to that territory where he needs to start taking those next steps.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about it right now, right? So there's 53 games left in the year. Like, I guess my question to you, Eduardo, is would you rather him be the number 1 goalie in San Diego for the rest of that season? Or would you rather move on from Stolarz? Because that just makes the easiest one, right? You can always find a place to send a quality backup in the league. It makes less than $1 million. There would be more than enough teams who would give you a second for that player.
Yep.
And then have it kind of be a 30-20 split with Gibby Dostal for the rest of the season? Like, which would you rather have, do you think? Would you rather him just be the definitive number one down in San Diego, or take a little bit more, just be like a little bit above a backup?
Yeah. If I had to choose between the two scenarios, I would choose with him, with Stolarz moving and him becoming that, that backup behind John Gibson, basically taking the starts that Stolarz would get, the back-to-backs, and in a heavy schedule of games, if there's no back-to-backs, one start here or there, which would give him about 15 to 20 starts near the end of the year from now. That would be like the ideal situation between the two. I think what probably plays out and what's the most likely scenario is he goes back down to San Diego when Stolarz is healthy, is a starting netminder until the deadline, and then Stolarz could potentially get moved at that point. And then for the the end of the season, February beyond, he takes up that role as the backup and gets to hopefully at that point more of a split for the rest of the year. I think what the Ducks did, I believe, at the end of last year with Stolarz and Gibson as well, as they almost the last 10 games of the season, they just back and forth, and they both play 5. So I think that's the most likely situation we see, but I would be between the two of him staying down and being number one in San Diego for the rest of the year, or taking over that spot from Stolarz and doing like a 30-20 split with Gibson. I'd rather see that because I think he's ready for that next step, and he needs at this point as many NHL games as he can get to really start getting his feet wet at that level. So I think he's ready for it. I'd love to see it.
Yeah, no, I am prone to agree. The thing that's interesting is he is an RFA at the end of this season. In that vein, I do wonder if it does make more sense to not give him an opportunity to look great.
Yeah.
And it's shitty, but whatever. It is what it is, right? That's the reality of it. I do wonder if maybe what you want to do is bring him in, like you said, at the very end of the season after the deadline, maybe you can get like 8-9 games, something like that.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, okay, so, and you give him like a 3-by-1 point, like basically give him the deal you just gave Troy Terry, right?
Yeah.
And just be like, okay, perfect. Now you're our backup. And then, Gibby's got 4 years left at that point. So, it makes sense.
Best case, by the end of those 3 years, you're ready to be the starter.
Right. And at that point,
or you are the starter, and where we've got you on a nice deal. So. Yeah,
and worst comes to worst, you can always, at that point, he'll be an expiring, so you could move on from Gibby if you needed to, right? And Dostal, and again, that's the best case scenario, is you're now in a position where Dostal has come in and claimed that spot for himself, but you're not kind of screwed quite like Florida was with Spencer Knight being a little quick to be ready and Bobrovsky having the fucking deal from hell still. And so I think, you're less, if in the summer of 2026 you're moving on from a second-round pick and, a decent prospect to move John Gibson's last year of his deal, I don't think you're too upset about that. So I looking at that and not realize, I don't know why I didn't realize he was an RFA at the end of this year. I do think it is, like you're saying, far more likely now that he doesn't come up to the deadline.
That's just the expiry of the entry level, right, at this point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So he doesn't have arb rights or anything like that. But, he's going to be...
No, it can definitely play into it.
He's going to be 23 next summer.
Yeah, it just feels like the next step in that progression is... I think they're getting obviously they have to get a look at him right now. It is a back-to-back, and Stolarz is hurt, and he's the third man, beyond anybody else in this organization right now. So they have to get a look at him. But every time he comes up and performs well, you're like, and I'm sure the organization sees it as, okay, like we've got to start getting more looks at this kid. We're 29 games in, and this is his first look on this year. He's been good again in the AHL. He's been good again with his first look of the season this year. You got to start getting more looks at him, and I think it makes it easy to have those conversations about moving Anthony Stolarz at the deadline. As good as Stolarz has been, like at some point you've got you've got to make way for this
Right.
kid to start getting more
It's
starts.
not in
Yeah.
any way a knock against Anthony Stolarz, right? Because I think the reality of it is in a perfect world, you probably move John Gibson, but the contract makes that far from feasible.
Yeah.
And so at that point, what it is, it's about he's a good player on a great contract. He can get Anaheim a quality asset, I would assume, and he could have a chance to go make a cup run with somebody. You know what I mean? It's not in any way a knock on him. It's more of just the totality of the circumstance and his being a good player, you know, and if he's the backup goalie for somebody, I don't think you're in a bad way with it. So
no, and he's proven it enough that he can be a quality backup, even with the struggles that the Ducks have had. This has really been the first year that he struggled, and the Ducks have just been bad to a whole nother level this year. Avid 25 had a question in the chat. So, do you think the bad season slows the growth of Zegras and McTavish at all? I'll let you start with that one.
I don't. I'm not. I don't. If, like, from a skill perspective, from a physical perspective, I don't think it has any real issue on that. I think you run the risk of there being some, I don't know, like mental or emotional residue kind of being left on them. But it's so early in the process. And again, like, I do think Aikens is a quality communicator, and I think his ability to kind of stay engaged with these young players and things like that, and even when it's not going great, like, I do have faith that he can talk to them in a way that's not going to ruin their development. You know, Trevor Zegras is having a nice year. Mason McTavish is having a nice year. Like, I don't think there's really anything to be concerned about in the way that they're playing right now. You know, I mean, I think the team overall is obviously shit, but I don't think those guys, you look at the way that they're playing this year and are worried that next year there could be a significant step back beyond, you know, Mason McTavish just having a sophomore slump or whatever it is. But I don't see anything from them this year that makes me concerned about their ability to keep progressing, right?
Yeah, it's funny, like, this always comes up in any argument with, like, young players on a bad team, and is continually being that bad going to stunt their growth or hurt their development. Like, it's a question that always comes up. So it's not a bad question at all. But I always want, like, you always end up seeing the other side of it, right? And most of the time, if the player is you know, touted as being a superstar or a quality player, they turn it around and become that player at the end of the day. Like, and I think the fact with Zegras and McTavish are also both already playing well this year. Like, I don't think they're victims of it. You know, like, one guy who I think has been at, like, the heat of that conversation for a while has been Clayton Keller in Arizona. And, you know, they're still bad this year, and he's still a great player for them this year, right? Like, a guy who's going to be putting up 60, 70 points. And one of those guys maybe you don't appreciate until the team is actually good, where you start saying, okay, like, this guy's a big part of their success here, and not just 60 points wasted on a tough year. I don't think at all it's going to slow the growth of Zegras and McTavish. If anything, like, it's an interesting growth spot for them to be put into, and how they handle, you know, the struggles of being this bad, and where the games don't really mean anything, and as the season goes on, they're going to mean much less than they do now. You're not really fighting for anything. You're just really playing for your pride at that point to finish the season strong and try and win every game that you're going into. So I think it's a good learning opportunity for both of them, and if anything, it helps develop character. And I think in that sense, you've got the right coach in place to help them get through a tough season like this. So I am thankful for the player coach side of things for Dallas Eakins, that he's there during this, and there isn't, you know, lofty expectations put on this team, that they, you know, aren't stupid enough to think they are competitors and that they should be fighting for a playoff spot. And then that translates to the players saying, okay, well, you guys aren't good enough, this and that. And then it starts being a really unbearable place to play. I think that does help them, that they can go out there, focus on their game, and just try and win every game that they go out there and play. And I don't think it's had a negative effect on them. I haven't seen, any signs from them that it's affected them in a negative way playing in for such a bad team this year. And I think they all know that the project is in place and they're big parts of it, and eventually that this is going to turn around and they're going to be at the forefront of why it does. So I don't think it slows the growth of them by any means.
Yeah, no, I think like you said, it's going to be a project, and it's going to take them some time. And I think like I saw earlier, like I mentioned earlier, Trevor Zegras just kind of quitting on the 3-on-0, like really frustrated me. And like, again, like I said, like it just breaks my brain because like that's the stuff that you can control, right? It's just the effort. Whether or not you get there is a different conversation, but you can control the effort. But like, I don't really think that that's a result of this year. I don't think that's a result of him quitting on the coach or anything like that. I think what that's a result of is like him being a smart player and knowing like I'm not going to be able to get there. So it really is up to the goalie to make a save. And the moment the goalie made a save, like he did try to jump into the play. This is just one of those things for me that I would prefer to see him be there so that if the goalie, like if Dostal does make that save, he's in a very much better position to take that and go the other direction and get that pressure off of Dostal after, saving their asses like that. So, like, I don't think that even that, which, again, broke my brain, frustrated me, pissed me off, frankly. I would have benched Trevor for, 3-4 minutes for that shit. I don't think that's an indictment of the coach. I don't think that's an indictment of the player's relationship with the coach or with the player's ability to cope with having such a down year as far as wins and losses go. And I don't think ultimately it's an indictment of the player. I think this is one of those things where you're just like, meh, and I'm sure more
it
people
happens
than not,
regardless, I think.
Yeah, and I think more people than not would say I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, and that's probably true. So to that point, I'm not worried about it yet. I think they played with a little bit more tempo tonight than they did in the San Jose game, but that wasn't going to be hard to do. I think for me, seeing how they finish this road trip will have a lot of kind of influence on how I feel about this team going through, the heart of the year where it's going to suck, where teams are going to be really breaking it down, where teams are going to, or battening it down, teams are really going to be starting to look to add guys. Maybe pieces of this team are going to be gone. Maybe other teams are going to be getting better, right? Like there's just all these other things that as they get into January, February, it's going to change. And at this point, I don't think there's any reason to think it's having a significantly negative effect on them beyond the fact that they're probably just pissed.
Yeah. Nobody likes to lose, but there aren't any negative signs in terms of attitude or body language that show that things are just like devolving quickly. All right, so we had some news about the World Junior, the players, the prospects for Canada at the World Juniors. All three of them that were named to World Junior camps for Team Canada. It was Nathan Gauthier, Olin Zellweger, which weren't big surprises returning from last year, and Tyson Hinds, who were named to Canada's World Junior Selection Camp. The roster was announced today. All three of them made it, which was, again, not a surprise for Gauthier and Zellweger, a little surprising for Tyson Hinds, but it's nice to see rewarding for a great season that he's had so far. And I personally haven't been able to watch a ton of him, so I know it's not going to be a major role for Canada that he gets, but I hope it is at least, not a seventh defenseman, is a consistent role on a nightly basis, on a game-by-game basis, that we get to see him play. I'm excited for him. He was on hand in Moncton for the announcement to be like one of the guys that are there when they make that announcement. So I'm happy for him, man. It's great to see all three of them go, and listen, if you're going to want to watch Ducks prospects this year at the World Juniors, you got to cheer for Team Canada, right? So that's just the case.
Yeah, not to mention that Fantilli and Bedard, I think according to Scott Wheeler's lineup projection, he had them playing wing for Logan Stankoven, and that's just Jesus, man. That sounds like a hell of a time.
Both of them on the same line, I think, is unbelievable.
Right. And then on top of that, you've got them playing. You've got Stankoven down the center
Yeah.
And that absurd shot that he has, like that's just.
So it's four Ducks prospects at this time.
Yeah, yeah.
One of Fantilli and Bedard will be a Duck. Hopefully Bedard, but Fantilli's a nice secondary choice if it comes down to it. So.
But I think it's great. I think it's nice to see, a couple of these guys, because again, like when this season is going this direction, this is the kind of stuff that you're looking to be able to kind of lean on and go, the future's not quite as dark as it seems. This is kind of the light at the end of the tunnel, is seeing guys like Zellweger and Hinds, and Gaucher. Like these are guys that, with the exception, I would say, of Zellweger, like these are guys that making it is more encouraging than not for Anaheim, right? Because like Zellweger, exactly what you're getting with him. We know his size isn't an issue at this level for him. So it makes sense that, he's got all the skill in the world and he's going there. What it's going to be with him is whatever preseason he plays, right? Next year is when it'll be a little bit more of seeing what he's got, but you expect him to be on this team. Yeah. Gaucher is going to be playing a depth role for them. Tyson Hinds is going to be playing a depth role for them. And they're not as flashy. They're not as much of a standout. And so to see them make this team and be able to play, hopefully, meaningful roles and be contributors to, again, a Team Canada roster that should pretty much walk into every tournament expecting to win. And when they don't, it's an indictment on basically the entirety of Canada. It's good. It's going to be nice to watch and to see how they do. And then, again, like when this team is this bad right now, looking at guys like Fantilli and Bedard and being able to see some of these guys at this tournament who are going to be have their name in the top of the hat for the draft in 23, like it's great. It's an opportunity for, Anaheim fans to have a little bit of fun, to find something a little bit more positive to root for. And, it's nice to just have something a little bit different, kind of wash the taste of shit out of your mouth.
Yeah, no, for sure. I look forward to this tournament every year. It's always nice being able to see, obviously, as many Ducks prospects as we can there. It's not going to be quite as high profile for Ducks fans as the last two, and obviously Zegras was the main draw for us 2 years ago, and McTavish last year. Obviously, we know about the back-to-back MVP situation that the Ducks ended up walking into. So nothing really like that on the horizon. Zellweger is going to be the main guy to watch for Ducks fans this year on Canada, or I guess Bedard and Fantilli will be the main guys for anybody, including Ducks fans, to watch this year. But in terms of current prospects, Zellweger will be the guy. Yeah.
So no, go finish.
No, it's just because Zellweger will be the guy, hoping that he ends up, being a best defenseman at the tournament, or at least in that discussion.
Yes, I think that's more than fair, and I think that's right. It's like if you're looking at guys who have the potential to have the kind of tournament that McTavish and Zegras just did, it's absolutely Zellweger. But I think if you're an Anaheim fan, the other guys are the guys that are more important to watch. Yeah. When are they used? Who are they put out there with? What are they being asked to do? How do they play? Because we know Zellweger can dominate this level. He's just too good.
Yeah.
And he might not do it every game, but we have seen him take over games. We know that any one shift of his can be absurd. And so I think getting an idea of what these guys do that, again, like fucking Nathan Gauthier is already like 6'3", 210. Like the only thing holding him back from being in the NHL is like his age and whatever like skill or technical maturity that he kind of needs to continue to build on. And the same thing with Tyson Hinds. Like he's a guy who just kind of surprised. I think he was like a late round draft pick a couple years ago.
Yeah,
4, 5, 6 range, something like that. And I know it's like half the fucking draft, but anyways, but like so, like it'll be really cool and to kind of see what these guys do and how they're used and what they can kind of hopefully bring to Anaheim moving forward.
Yeah, no, well deserved for Tyson this year. Is 28 points in 27 games. I don't think he's ever really been, high on Hockey Canada's radar. So it's just one of those types of situations where he's had a really good year. They like what he's going to bring. probably not on the offensive side of things. Not to say, again, he's never been a flashy point-getting offensive defenseman, but he's been one of those guys who kind of like can steadily put up like a half point per game. And now in his what I think is his final season of junior, he started to take that next step forward in that sense. So he'll be a nice steady defenseman for them. He's 6'3", 190 pounds, so he's gonna be kind of a shutdown, rangy two-way guy for them. So he's just a guy I'm interested to watch more of. Right, of the other two we've seen a little bit of them. We watched them play in this tournament last year. With Hinds playing in Quebec, you don't get to watch too much of him as is already. So it'd be nice to get a couple more looks at him and really see what he can do. Another guy I would have really liked to see at the tournament was Tristan Luneau. I think he's deserved it the way he's played. He's second in QMJHL scoring among defensemen. But with guys like Brant Clark coming back and Zellweger coming back, it's hard to get those types of defensemen. Like, it's funny, like, it's easier for guys like Tyson Hinds almost to make it because you have a different skill set. You're a shutdown guy. You're gonna play a different role. They know the role you're gonna play. For Luneau, it's harder for him to make it because the high profile level of defensemen, of the point getters. There's always the really top high echelon guys like Clark and Zellweger who are gonna take those roles. You're not really gonna get a guy like Luneau who's gonna come in and be brought onto the roster as that type of defenseman when you've already got those guys there. So I think based on skill alone, like, he deserves to be on Team Canada, but when you've got those roles filled by just elite level prospects like that, you can't justify bringing a guy like that to the tournament, unfortunately. But he's going to stay back, and he's going to hopefully continue to play well. We mentioned Mintyukov, Pastuov as well as guys that Pastuov with the snub. That once he comes back from injury is going to, or injury or illness, I'm not sure why he's out right now, but he'll continue to play well. And Mintyukov, obviously with Russia not being at the tournament, is going to be able to stay with Saginaw and continue playing really well for them. He scored his 13th goal of the season a couple days ago as a defenseman, which is just wild. Like, this guy's just balling out this year. So future's bright, and hopefully brighter with Connor Bedard at the end of the season.
Yeah, so just to update everybody, Tyson Hinds went 76th overall in 2021, which was a third-round pick. So he was a very high third-round pick, so I could not have been more wrong if I tried. But yeah, he's gonna have an opportunity to play a meaningful depth role for the team, and it's gonna be awesome. It's really exciting. Like you said, it's a bummer we're not gonna get to see Pastyov or Mintyukov because, one, it would be really great to see more of Mintyukov, knowing, that you want to look for him. And then with Pastyov, it's always just interesting to see kind of, where guys are, and using things like World Juniors and stuff like that as measuring sticks for how they're doing against their peers, how they're coming along in their development, things like that. So it'll be a fun tournament to watch there, and it just maybe makes rookie camp next year all the more interesting because we won't have had the opportunity to see some of these guys.
Yeah.
Until I guess, the Memorial Cup or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which Pastyov or Mintyukov and even Luneau as well could both be a part of. All right. 3 games remaining this week. Toronto tomorrow, Montreal Thursday, and Edmonton on, I believe, Saturday. Let me double check. Yeah, Edmonton on Saturday. What do you have as your results for these games? This is our Ducks game score predictions brought to you by 714 Tickets. What do you got, Steven?
I will say they beat Toronto. And
bold statements. But you have been relatively almost close to correct every week so far, so I shouldn't be saying anything. I said that they were going to beat San Jose and lose against Carolina, and both were wrong. So
yeah, I just think that this is one of those things where, like, if you told me they took my brain completely turned off. If they took Toronto to shootout, that wouldn't surprise me, right? I could see Gibby having a bounce back game. against high-end opponents. Sorry. I could see Gibby just having a bounce back game, having a great game, standing on his head for a little bit against, a big team, and them getting a random shootout win. Montreal, I would expect them to lose because there seems to be something to, they certainly don't show up for the bottom half of this league, and that's Montreal. So then who's after Montreal? Is LA, you said? Edmonton. Oh, yeah, no, they're going to get smoked by Edmonton. There's no structure, there's no foot speed, there's no physicality, anything that you can use to minimize or, slightly nudge off his game of McDavid and Draisaitl, they just don't have right now. So unless we get a superstar game out of one of the young kids, which I would love to see, I think they're going to get absolutely destroyed.
Yeah, I think that one will be a high-scoring one. But Draisaitl absolutely loves playing against us, and it's in Edmonton. It's going to be a tough one. I picked that one as a loss too. I think I'm going to flip the Toronto-Montreal game on you, which means I'll probably be wrong. I'm going to pick a loss to Toronto just because every time, like I said, every time I watch that game, every time I make plans either to go to that game or to head to a buddy's house to watch that game, they lose. So I don't have any faith them ever winning in Toronto. So I'm going to pick a loss tomorrow and win against Montreal. I do think one of the Toronto or Edmonton game will go to overtime or a shootout. I think we'll be able to drag one of those games and get an extra point out of it. I'm hoping at least just for one win out of this, I guess it's a 5-game road trip, but of these 4 games this week, obviously the first one ending in a loss. So out of these next 3, I'm hoping for a win, and I think the most likely and place for it to come is against Montreal, which, again, like I said, probably means that it won't end up happening.
Gonna get smoked.
Yeah.
It's gonna be an interesting road trip. Historically the Eastern Canada road trip is not the kindest to Anaheim, and the Oilers being what the Oilers are right now, that's just kind of doomed to fail in a sense. But they'll have an opportunity to, try to salvage a little bit of pride, a little bit of dignity before they come home. I don't know, man. It's going to be really interesting. I think it's going to be an interesting week and get an idea of kind of where this team is at. But I would really like to see somebody on this team over the next couple of games just step up and really kind of assert themselves, even if I don't know, even if it's just like nastiness or something, right? Go run a goalie. I don't give a shit. Do something and just really find someone on this team who can try to spark a little bit of life back into this team, because I think some of the leadership guys that they have right now, their leadership style isn't that, and that's not to their detriment. It's just that's not the kind of guys they are, and when you have guys acting outside of themselves is when you get into trouble and things like that. So you just want to see a little bit somebody. I would really like to see somebody just kind of try to make a point over these next couple of games that you might beat them, but they are going to make it easy. And you can make an argument Dostal did that tonight, and that's awesome for him. He had a great effort, like we said earlier. So
I think it's 6 more games until Christmas. Toronto, Montreal, Edmonton, LA, Minnesota, Calgary. 6 more games until Christmas, 8 more games in the month of December.
They play on the 27th?
They play on the 28th.
They play the Sharks, right?
Vegas.
Oh, Vegas. Okay.
Yeah. So it's after the road trip. It's Minnesota, Calgary, Vegas, Nashville at home. It's actually a 9-game homestand with the first 5 games in January it's a 10-game homestand. The first 6 games in January are at home: Philly, Dallas, San Jose, Boston, Edmonton, New Jersey, before they head out on the road for another longish road trip, 6 games after that. So we're working our way slowly here to the halfway point of the season. It's been a struggle so far, but again, like we always say, light at the end of the tunnel. Anything else you want to hit before we move to start wrapping this one up?
According to Evolving Hockey, Nathan Beaulieu has the best relative XG, expected goals for per 60 of anybody on the Ducks.
Yeah. Do with that what you will.
Former
that doesn't
or future Norris winner Nathan Beaulieu,
yeah,
whose name I think I've said 7 different times over the course of this year, and I won't apologize for it. I have no idea how to say that fucking word.
yeah. It's like Goche. We don't really know how to say it.
That's not how I. Again, like I have nowhere to stand on this, but I just know that's not how you're supposed to say that. There's no T. There's not even an I. Like there's nothing there.
Every French name that looks like that is Goche. It has to be.
I don't think that's how that works.
Freddy the Goat. Even if it's spelled Gaucher, it's going to sound like it's Gauthier. It's gonna just
Gauthier?
Yeah, Freddy the Goat. Isn't it Freddy Gauthier? They all sound like Goche.
I thought Gauthier was the dude who sang the "Didn't Have to Let Me Go" song, and that was Gotye.
Gotye.
Yeah, Gauthier. He's like the
didn't
have to let. Yeah,
Maybe.
that's
Is he French
that's how you say it. Probably. Seems French Canadian.
Yeah. Any spelling.
It's like a weird
Gauthier.
David Bowie knockoff.
Yeah,
it's probably French Canadian.
100%. The fact that I've seen the music video on TV when I was growing up, like enough, and heard it on the radio, it's 90% Canadian.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. Side note.
Because I love that you guys have a homegrown talent fucking quota. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's how many songs I thought were like uber popular until doing this podcast and meeting you guys and talking to Americans more, and then realizing that 90% of the songs of my childhood on the radio are just Canadian artists that we were forced to listen to.
Yeah, pretty much. And
they weren't really popular songs. We were just forced to make them popular because of Canadian radio.
That rocks. Is Pup a Canadian band?
Pup? I don't know.
Okay.
I haven't heard of them.
They're one of those bands that I only ever hear hockey people talk about, like Pup. What is it? The Hold Steady, and then what's that fucking old person Canadian band?
Nickelback.
No, dumbass, not that. The
Tragically Hip.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a couple bands that I have to ask if they're as popular in the same scene there as they are here, knowing that they were big here, but I'm not knowing if it was just because we were forced to listen to them. So Billy Talent and Marianas Trench, were they big in like the pop punk scene in the U.S.?
What's the first one you said? Billy Talent.
Billy Talent. So I would
no,
take that
absolutely
as no.
not.
Okay.
Marianas Trench is a thing I think I've heard of, but I don't know that I ever heard.
So it's a thing. Like their band name is based off of an actual thing. So you've probably heard of the thing.
Yeah, I definitely know what the Marianas Trench is.
Wow, I figured the second one. I figured the second one. Yeah, okay, maybe not. I thought Billy Talent was bigger than that.
Did you ever hear of an artist named Billy Talent who did like pop punk?
That's only 1990s.
Yeah, my girlfriend said to go back to fucking Yukon.
Well, damn. I gotta bring more of those because they're.
And let me tell you right now, the dudes who do the Calgary Flame Rap are not popular in California, in the States.
Yeah, I figured they're not popular here either.
Thank God.
All right. Well,
the biggest Canadian down here is Gordon Lightfoot.
Who?
Gordon Lightfoot?
just
The record of Edmund Fitzgerald? The greatest Canadian musician of all time?
Shania Twain, Justin Bieber.
Screw both of them. Sorry. We've got an argument about Gordon Lightfoot versus Shania Twain and Justin Bieber.
Come on. We all know who the real OG is. All right. That's going to do it. Thanks for listening, guys. Tough go, but we're back at it again tomorrow. I mean, we're not back at it, but the Ducks are back at it tomorrow. You thought you might get a full return of the post-game show. That's not happening.
No.
No. We'll be back next week or on the weekend. One of the two, depending on when Steven and I feel like doing.
There will absolutely be at least one more show between now and Christmas.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Probably.
Which means that you guys won't hear from us till February.
Yeah. And you'll continue to not hear from Pat and Jay until we decide to let them out of our basement. So
it's not looking great, guys.
No, it's not looking good. If you want to help us keep going throughout the season, you can find us on Apple Podcasts. Search for Ever Mighty and leave us a rating and a review, and we'll read it on the show, which we say every time, and I haven't looked. So I will look, and if there are new ones, we'll read it on the show. We do really appreciate them, despite me not looking at them. Also on Spotify, you can leave us a rating now, so make sure to do that if you haven't already. All video versions of the show exist on YouTube. You can go to youtube.com/ForeverMightyPodcast. Make sure to subscribe. And we also put out additional content on there when we can. Has been a while, but the most recent additional content, there has been a few interviews by yours truly, Steven. So there is extra episodes that do go out on YouTube. Check out our website at forevermighty.com to find everything in one place, where to watch, listen to the show, how to support the show. You can find some bios on the two hosts that we continually refer to as Pat and Jay, if you want to learn a bit more about them, because you're not going to learn more about them on the show.
It is weird. They both changed their names to symbols, and they are now the podcasters known as Jason and Pat.
Yeah.
And now their names are just symbols.
Well,
So cool.
like we refer to them every show, and there's probably some new listeners that have come on this year, I would hope, right? But they don't know who they are beyond that one episode that Pat came, and a few episodes that Jay's been here this year. So if you want to find out more about them, you can go
call your senator.
You can look at
PM.
their bios, and you can go back to episodes from a couple years ago when they were on more often. But yeah, they are avid. They are like they are myths like unicorns. Yes, you are 100% correct. On Twitter, you can find us at ForeverMightyFM. Myself at Eddy Van Jones, and Steven is at The Hockey Boomer. But that's going to do it for today. Thanks for letting us relive the past year with a post-game show. Thanks for everyone for listening. We're going to try and do these more often when we can. But I think the future of the post-game show, we're going to try and do more, what are they called? Twitter Spaces?
Yeah, for however long Twitter lasts. Twitter could be dead tomorrow for all we know.
Yeah, that was the plan until Twitter went AWOL. So I don't know if that's going to be the case, but the reason we did this post-game show on Twitch is because we needed to do an episode anyway, because we didn't do one this weekend. But any future post-game shows, if we don't also have to do a show, we're going to try and do on Twitter Spaces. But stay tuned before Jesus, I can't
You're all right, man. We'll have another one
before Christmas.
Before Christmas. And then on the other side of the holidays, I've got two different conversations I want to have. One, I want to have Yellow Pinata, Chris Watkins back on. We just had Seahack. We just had Michael Blake McCurdy did a wonderful presentation on aging curves, and I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with Chris about that. The other one is a buddy of mine named Evan Liu, writes for Mile High Hockey. He's one of the editors there, and we're gonna, talk about the Avs a little bit and some big league-wide stuff, and maybe play a dumb game or something like that. But he has agreed to come on, but he's like 15, so I have to wait for him to not have finals. But then we're going to talk to him. So we've got a couple of things we're hoping to do. Like Eddy said, go back, check out the stuff we've done in the past, some of the different conversations.
Oh yeah, we are.
We just had an interview with Lindsay Imber, who is the organist for the Ducks. That was a really, really fun time. She was awesome.
That was a good one.
Support her on Twitter or whatever. If you, again, listen to that episode. We had a lot of fun talking to her. Or I had a lot of fun talking to her. She was great.
Yeah.
So.
And we are also working on an interview with Pavel Mintyukov at some point. Had it already all set up and ready to schedule, and then I caught COVID, I think this was a month ago.
You caught something, man, and it wasn't good.
And then when I was talking with them to reschedule it for this week, I got the flu this week. So both times I've tried to schedule it, I've been sick. So hopefully they're more than forgiving to come and try at it a third time here. That one probably at this point and how close it is to Christmas will be an after Christmas one, but that is also in the works too. So that will be. That'll be a fun one to bring in, and I'm sure he'll have plenty of time, obviously, with No World Juniors as well. So that'll be a fun one to sit down and do. But Thanks for everybody who came out live. Thanks for everybody listening after the fact. And we'll see you one more time, at least before Christmas. Take care, guys.
Bye, everybody.